horns sound, like when you wah 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 wah. Welcome to, you know what I mean? It's like air horns rule.
Brad might have an air horn. Brad, do you have an air horn with you?
No. I have foam Jeff Hardy fingers. Those don't make any noise.
Is that a euphemism?
No, I literally have them that I bought it.
So
Look, let's not talk about my foam fingers, all right?
So thanks for joining. Thanks for joining us. You have found your way to WWE WrestleMania Raw is Life podcast, a podcast where people talk about the WWF. Am I close?
The World Wildlife Foundation.
So
that's what I'm here to talk about.
So I'm the classic archetype, the fish out of water. For our podcast, see, I'm going to be the guy that doesn't know anything, and then I'm going to set up for you to educate me, who is also the audience. See, I am the representative of the audience. I am Joe Everyman.
Oh, you segued into being serious.
Joe Everyman.
Slightly. Joe, okay, I'm just gonna call you Joe.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't want you to use my full name every time you address me. That would be silly. So yeah, you can call me Joe.
Do you have a middle name? Joe.
Normal. Joe Normal Everyman.
Joe Normal Everyman. All right, I gotcha.
Right. And I'm here to represent the rest of the audience who doesn't know much about wrestling, and so you can help educate me on the WWs.
You have to be careful because I don't want you guys to get sued for using copyrighted names or information.
We don't have any money anyway.
So we're just going to scrap the Final Fantasy XIV podcast and just talk about pro wrestling? That's what you want to do, John? Because we'll do it.
Well, once you guys start that, I'm literally leaving. So it actually will work out totally fine for me. And I'm going to go play Final Fantasy XIV.
Well, and it works out because if you're Joe Everyman, they don't watch wrestling either because Joe Everyman is not a loser, and losers don't watch wrestling. They leave the room.
No, Joe Normal Everyman goes to play Final Fantasy XIV when the adults are talking about wrestling.
Oh.
So if you guys start talking about wrestling, I'm going to go play Final Fantasy XIV.
Well, I don't want to talk about wrestling.
I think if we start talking about wrestling, Brad will go play Final Fantasy XIV.
What makes you think I'm not playing it right now?
That's a really good point, actually.
I'm actually not.
I wouldn't.
My internet could
handle my sexiness and Vanadil at the same time. Where does it take? Eorza couldn't handle me in Eorza.
Slipped into Final Fantasy XI there for a while. That was
So what you have actually found yourself in, listener, is you have found your way to the Game Life Balance podcast, the U.S. edition, actually, of the Game Life Balance podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jonathan Martin. I'm joined, as always, by my other host, Cody Goff. And with us today is a special guest to discuss... I mean, he actually probably could have helped us discuss wrestling had that been our topic, but that's not actually our topic. Our topic today, we have actually all played the same video game, so we're going to go full gamer on this.
Full gamer.
We're going to go full gamer on this episode of Game Life Balance for the first time in a while. As you know, we are adults with lives, jobs. We're all busy people, but we have kind of all fallen. At least Cody and I have just recently fallen into a video game hole of Final Fantasy XIV, which is an MMO that I've actually talked about on the show before. And I've always told Cody he needs to play it because he's a Final Fantasy fan. And he finally started playing it, and he's already started to basically only play Final Fantasy XIV, which is the danger with MMOs. But we have a friend, and that's Brad. Brad Rockwell, who's here with us on the podcast today, and he is far more experienced with Final Fantasy XIV than either Cody or I. As I started playing only a few months ago, Cody literally started playing this month. Brad, how long have you been playing Final Fantasy XIV?
Well, first of all, hello, and thanks for having me on. But I've been playing since launch of 2.0, which probably needs some explanation, but that equates to roughly 3 years of total play. Not 3 years of total playtime, but 3 years of playing the game regularly.
Okay. So, and right now I think they just did patch 3.5 three. Is
Yes,
that right?
3.3. Yes.
Yeah, and so there've been there's been quite a bit of content since the patch in which you started. How many hours a week would you say you play Final Fantasy XIV?
Wow. It depends. But usually I would say a week. Gosh, I would play probably at minimum 40 hours a week.
Okay, so we're looking at an MMO, right? So for the listener, we're going to be talking to we're kind of talking in layman's terms here, but Final Fantasy XIV is a game that is it's basically a world that you enter with a character, and you team up with other people in this world to accomplish various goals. It's called MMO because it's a massively multiplayer online game. It is very much in the vein of WoW, which is World of Warcraft.
It's probably the biggest comparison that you could make
Right,
in terms of describing what this game would be.
right, and generally with massively multiplayer online role-playing games, it is easy and common for people that get very involved with them to have that be oftentimes one of the only video games that they played. I have a very strong history with World of Warcraft. I mean, I did not play other video games other than World of Warcraft for probably 3 years of my life. It was literally the only game that I played.
Yes. In fact, the previous MMO made by this company, Square-Enix, they made that they make Final Fantasy XIV, but they also made a previous MMO, Final Fantasy XI. And before you even logged onto the game and entered the world, they had a disclaimer that you would have to agree to that said something along the lines of do not you have duties in real life, do not neglect them, you do not neglect your friends, your job, your school, your family, basically go outside once in a while. You had to
Wow.
actually agree to that sort of disclaimer before they let you log on to the game, and for whatever reason they've done away with that.
Now they
in this
don't
game,
care.
but
Now
now
they
they
just
don't
want.
care.
Yeah, now they don't care anymore. Now they just want you in the game. So basically, what we're saying is these are games that it is easy to get very involved with them. There's a lot of time sink mechanics in them generally, and so you can spend a very large amount of time with them. This game is no different. It very much is in the same style as the other MMOs that are out there. It's had kind of an interesting history, and that's actually one of the reasons we have Brad on is because he kind of lived through the original history of the game and knows quite a bit about it. So, Brad, I just kind of want you to talk about like where did this game come from? Because it didn't start off as this Final Fantasy XIV and Realm Reborn, right?
So it did not. It was initially created as sort of the spiritual successor to the game I just mentioned, Final Fantasy XI, which was the first MMO made under the Final Fantasy brand. And the creator and chief designer, I suppose, of Final Fantasy XI was chosen to create and design a new MMO, Final Fantasy XIV. And if you know anything about Final Fantasy XI, which probably I'm just going to assume you don't, is that it is a more hardcore style of MMO than WoW or what Final Fantasy XIV is, because there's sort of two generations of MMOs, I guess. There's the older MMOs, sort of in the vein of EverQuest, and that's the big one. So I'll just leave it at that. Where, like you mentioned before, these MMOs are a lot of time sink mechanics, very grindy, very time consuming. But the MMOs as they were first envisioned are way more so. Whereas, nowadays you have some kind of teleportation mechanic, say, to teleport you between point A and B. In Final Fantasy XI, you would literally have to walk from point A to point B, and that could take 3 real-life hours. So even just walking was literally a chore. So
Yeah, in those old MMOs you're talking about, I'll just interject something real quick because
Right.
I played a lot of EverQuest.
yeah, okay.
There was an opacity to the game where basically nothing was spelled out to you. In order to
Yes.
do anything in these old MMOs, you had to either you had to do a ridiculous amount of exploration on your own in the game, and it was incredibly obtuse as to what you were supposed to do for whatever quests you were possibly finding, or you had to go online to some sort of database. You basically had to go outside of the game to get information.
Yes.
And once World of Warcraft came around, it kind of flipped the whole thing on its head and said, "No, this is dumb. Like we're gonna make an accessible MMO." And basically every MMO since then has been in that vein of an accessible MMO.
For the most part, yes. So back to the original point that they wanted to create a more successful MMO after Final Fantasy XI, but they made a large mistake in choosing a game designer that was still very much in love with the old style work for everything type of MMO, and they decided to sort of make a compromise between the two, or at least attempt to. So they would take things from Final Fantasy XI that they thought worked and sort of modernize them by basically taking aspects from World of Warcraft and mixing them in to create somewhat of like a hybrid go-between game that would still give veterans of EverQuest and Final Fantasy XI the same kind of feeling, but while also being a little bit more accessible to the casual fan. And they failed miserably because in sort of trying to mix the two styles of a modern MMO and I don't want to say ancient MMO, but a first generation MMO, it didn't work.
I did a lot of reading on Wikipedia today, which is our source for gaming news. And apparently the graphics were a huge issue with the first one.
Right. So yes, that was actually going to be the next thing I mentioned. The graphics, like any Square game, they're very focused on graphics. That's one of their hallmarks. They have amazing graphics and amazing CGI, and they attempted to do the same kind of thing in Final Fantasy XIV, what's called 1.0. So they attempted to make it's a hugely detailed and immersive world, and what ended up happening is most of the high-end gaming computers at the time couldn't run it consistently. I don't have any numbers, but you always hear these stories like, yeah, I built a $4,000 gaming computer, and I could run Crysis, which is one of the benchmark games, but I couldn't run this game for anything. It was awfully optimized, and there's a story that the new developer of the game often tells about those times where there's a flower pot. I guess the way the story goes is one of the designers was given a job to create just some pretty stuff, create a flower pot, and he didn't really have any other responsibilities for developing the game, so he put his full force into it, and he came up with this flower pot.
The best damn flower pot.
Oh yeah. He went all out, and the flower pot ended up containing more polygons and textures in that one flower pot than the entire Final Fantasy XIV re-release had in the entire game. So the one flower pot was harder to render than the entire game is now.
What?
And yes. So no computer can run it. It couldn't run, and it was not only was it a chore to just attempt to run, but it was a chore to play because of a number of other reasons. But
it was not good. It was in fact it was like really not good.
It was very slow, and there was a lot of design decisions that were just awful. One of them was experience. The experience points that you can earn to level up and make your character stronger was capped per week or per day.
What?
It was capped. So now you can if you have time, you can just keep going and going and going. But for some reason they decided they wanted to make this system where, let's say you choose the the archer class, that they capped it so that you could only get a certain amount of experience points per week or day, whatever it was, on archer, and then you had to wait for it to reset so you can then level some more. Which, for a game like an MMO where you want immersion, you want people to keep coming back to your game, to make it so that you can't play anymore just is completely ridiculous. And like, why would you do that? Like, it's sort of like, I don't know, like buying a ticket to a baseball game and being told, oh, well, we're only going to show the first 3 innings, and then everybody's going to go home, and
you have to come back tomorrow.
Tomorrow you have to come back tomorrow, and then we're going to show 3 innings, and then you have to come back Saturday for the final 3 innings. So there you go.
So generally, the original incarnation of this game it is now generally accepted as one of the most like colossal failures in a huge budget release.
Yes.
That has pretty much ever happened, right?
I don't know about ever happened, but pretty much, I would say.
Certainly in the MMO sphere.
I'm sure they spent a lot of money trying to develop it, because I remember seeing all the commercials, and I remember all the hype behind it, and I mean, it's Square, so I can't imagine they wouldn't pay big money for a Final Fantasy title.
Right, and now it was so bad that it existed for 2 years in its original form, right?
It was so bad that the developer, the initial developer, and I'm pretty sure most of that development team was fired. And so most MMOs, when they fail this spectacularly, what happens is, so this MMO is a subscription-based MMO. You pay a monthly fee for access to the game. And those, in these days, generally don't tend to survive. Most of them end up going free to play, especially when they fail, because people aren't going to pay to play an awful game. So they had to make a decision. It failed so bad. What do we do? Do we go free to play? Do we just shut it down and just consider this just a gigantic loss? And somewhere along the line, they decided that they were going to shut it down, but they weren't going to shut it down forever. They were basically going to reset the whole thing, shut down the servers, and get a new development team in and develop the game again from the ground up, but this time do it better and do it correctly.
So they decided they were going to basically remake the game.
Yes, but the way they decided to remake it was very unique. They were going to, how do I explain this? They decided that they weren't going to shut it down for a period of time while they got, I guess, the development, going from, whatever they have to start it from. And they hired, actually, I believe initially they decided they were going to try and save the game. And it wasn't until that attempt at saving it wasn't working as well that they decided to shut it all down and remake it. But they hired a new developer and a new development team, and there were a couple of patches where he attempted to make things better by introducing new types of content, by changing the mechanics of the game slightly, by just developing it just a little bit better with the idea that by listening to fan feedback and be like, okay, we know it doesn't work, let's try and change some things. But they decided to do a cool thing story-wise, and that's they decided to set up a story event in the game where there was going to be this cataclysmic event that would occur in-game, according to the story, and it would coincide, this huge event would coincide with the actual shutdown of the servers.
Yeah, this is my favorite part of the entire development story, because this is what you told me about initially that I thought was super interesting about how you just like rip it off, but they have this in-game thing that's really awesome.
Right, so they take a lot of ideas from other Final Fantasy games, and the main idea they had is that they would have their big bad guy. He would get a hold of this technology that's able to basically cast meteor. And what it does is it takes one of the moons of this fictional planet, and it brings it crashing down in an attempt to destroy the entire world. And the impact of the meteor the on the planet coincided with them physically shutting down the servers in real life. So if you were playing the game at those last moments, you would see the meteor, like the last couple of months they added patches, and every patch they added, the meteor would get closer and get bigger, and there'd be a little bit more story about why this is happening. And it coincided in this large epic battle between the bad guys and the good guys, and um, you know, the players that are playing this, they didn't actually get to take place in the battle. It was simply a cutscene that they watched as the servers were going down. They showed this giant cutscene, which is actually the intro scene for the re-release. They sort of
Okay, yeah,
they
yeah.
tell you. But it was also cool in game because, you know, the last couple of weeks, the developers sort of said, well, we're going to start doing some crazy things. So what happened is, you know, this giant moon is coming crashing down, and all of the world, Heidelin, I believe is the world's name, is going into chaos. And so what the developers did is they decided to start just releasing monsters in the town. And the players would have to fight them off, and, you know, all this crazy stuff is happening. They basically started just breaking the rules of the game. Just why not? All this crazy stuff is happening, and then the developers actually, behind the scenes, took control of these monsters and fought against the players that were actually playing in the game. And there's this epic story about the devs take control of all these monsters, and they're coming up to invade one of the cities. I don't know which one. And the players organized this big defense where they all got on the same like the same mount in game, and they all mounted up and they all stood and made this huge wall of players to defend against the invading monsters, which were being controlled by the developers. And it was just this really cool thing. And then, you know, everybody gets to hang out while the cataclysmic event happens and the meteor comes crashing down. And then they get this amazing cutscene where, I mean, I guess it's not really spoilers because they literally tells you in the beginning of the re-release that this happens. But what happens is, up until then, they thought it was just a moon, that it was just a moon falling down, a physical piece of rock, I guess. But in the cutscene that was shown to the players when the servers were shutting down, it turns out that it's, you know, that's no moon. It's not just a moon. What it actually is an ancient prison that is holding captive a giant dragon of destruction. And
Bahamut.
So, Bahamut, yes. And the moon gets close, and it starts breaking up, and Bahamut emerges and does his fire breath and destroys all of Eorzea. And the player, I mean, it was just one of those moments that I hear was just amazing, because everyone's sad. Everyone's like, oh, it's the end of the end of an era. Final Fantasy XIV is over, you know, at least the current incarnation of it. And it's going to be so sad when this meteor falls to the ground, and then it's not a meteor, and it just hyped everyone up for what the next part of the story was. It was sort of like a huge cliffhanger. Like, they thought it was going to be this solemn kind of sad event, but it ended up being this incredible lore moment where now they're really excited about the direction that the game is
Yeah,
going.
it's their new jumping off point.
Yeah,
Right.
and I remember I was at E3. It must have been 2012 or 2013, right around the time they released the Realm Reborn, and it was in development. And
Yes.
of all the lines at E3, I mean, you could play the PlayStation 4 for the first time ever, the Xbox One for the first time ever, with about a half-hour wait. The Final Fantasy XIV Realm Reborn lines were 3 to 4 hours long the entire time I was there. I could go near it, and I'm like, well, apparently people are excited about this, so they did a good job with the hype machine, because it was literally the longest lines of the entire show. And this was the year before Xbox One and PS4 came out. So again, like your first chance to get your hands on a next gen piece of hardware, and all people cared about, it seemed, were Final Fantasy XIV. So I kind of wish I would have known that all of this was going on. And you knew about this because you said you started playing the Realm Reborn on day one when it came out.
Yes, on re-release. Because I didn't I wasn't a fan of Final Fantasy XIV. Like I never tried it, and I looked at it and I was like, well, I already play Final Fantasy XI because that was my main MMO, and it seemed similar but different enough that why do I need another MMO that's basically the same thing? So I just wasn't interested. So I never moved. I never switched, and it wasn't until they decided to remake the game, and I started hearing all the things about it that made me decide to try it. And I'm really glad I did because it's amazing. So
do you like it more than 11?
It's yes and no.
I mean, it's such a different thing, right?
Well, and it's also Final Fantasy XI was my first MMO, so it's sort of like your first. Like Final Fantasy XIV is a better game, and it's more polished, but Final Fantasy XI, it'll never make me feel the same way that Final Fantasy XI did. Just the nostalgia for that game is just way too strong because, like the first time in I don't know, it's just your first MMO, so it's just like the first time you eat ice cream or something. I don't know.
No, that makes sense. No, sometimes I'm playing on a team with John in Final Fantasy XIV, and he accidentally calls me the name of his old WoW guild members, and it's hurtful.
It's awkward to everybody, actually.
Yeah.
Why are you so familiar with his ex WoW guild members?
It's because I call him my ex WoW guild members. Mm-hmm. I can completely commiserate with that because while World of Warcraft was basically my first MMO. I mean, I actually did play a lot of EverQuest, but it was not like I did not take part in the social aspect of the MMO thing. World of Warcraft was my very first like very social introduction to the MMO, and around the second expansion, I was leading raids for my guild. I was like the main tank for our guild, and it was I legitimately feel like I made real friends. I mean, there's somebody that we've met outside of the game who lives in Ohio multiple times. Like there was just this sense of community, and I'm assuming that's probably kind of what you had with FF11.
Yeah.
Because that's what I remember. Like I don't necessarily. I remember the big things that happened in the game of me playing World of Warcraft, but only in the context of with other people, like raiding with other people.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't so much raid because raiding in Final Fantasy XI was a little bit different. I never got into that. That was because Final Fantasy XI was so much work that I never got really that into endgame and the actual raiding. There were raids along the way, but but you're right. I mean, with the social aspect of it, but I probably have more social interaction in Final Fantasy XIV, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, we can probably talk about Final Fantasy XIV now because we've kind of been introing it for
right
for a while, but there's
5 hours or so by now.
There's a reason. Trust me, anytime I'm with Cody, it generally feels that way.
I mean, you're not calling me Veto.
There's a It's Vato, and Alvato ruled. Mm-hmm. You can never live up to him.
You love the Vato,
dude. Vato was awesome. So, he was a hunter. He was hilarious. He was awesome.
I know. I've heard all about him.
Yeah, Alvato ruled
all the time.
Okay, so Final Fantasy XIV. I was thinking about how I personally kind of wanted to talk about this game, and we've talked about these other MMOs that exist, and I was thinking about how I think in order for an MMO to succeed in today's world, because World of Warcraft exists. It is hands down the number one MMO. It has always been. It most likely will always be the most successful that ever existed. And I mean, until we get into like crazy virtual reality stuff that might happen later on in life. But regardless, like in order to exist in this space for any other games, they have to have some kind of hook, and that hook has to be good. And I was trying to think, and I was thinking, what is Final Fantasy XIV's hook? And because the game does a lot of very traditional MMO type things.
It's a World of Warcraft clone.
Very much so, right?
Basically.
Yeah, basically. In that, like, there are quest givers, they have exclamation points above their head. You get quests by talking to them. They give you objectives. They'll tell you where to go for the objectives. You go do the objectives. You get a reward.
It's sort of like the carrot on the stick model, where they give you just enough to keep going for and rewards just quick enough that you don't feel like you're really... Like, you might feel like you're working towards something and that you're rewarded, but you don't feel frustrated for the most part. You're given just enough rewards to keep going and keep going and keep going.
And generally, that's the same way that World of Warcraft works. I mean,
Right.
Like Brad said, it's pretty much a World of Warcraft clone. So what is kind of the hook, right, that then makes Final Fantasy XIV worth playing? And what it is that you are not committed to a single class by the character that you pick. And I think that is the biggest unique differentiator of this game than any other MMO that I've played or read about. And basically the way that this works in this game is that your class is determined solely by the weapon that you equip on your character. And
Yes.
so what that means is that in the game there are battle classes, which are there to fight stuff. There are harvesting classes, which are there to harvest stuff. And then there are crafting classes, which are there to craft stuff. And there's probably 20-ish different classes. I don't know the exact number. I would...
Yeah, I
About
mean, I
20?
can see the class screen in my mind.
It's like 20.
It's a lot, yeah.
It is.
I mean, I believe there's roughly an equal number of crafting and gathering classes as there are battle classes.
Yeah, it's like 20 to 25, somewhere in that range. That's how many classes there are. Each one of these classes has its own individual experience bar.
And its individual story as well.
Right. And we'll talk about story in a bit,
yeah,
because that's something that needs its own period of time. But each class has a full 60 levels worth of content and experience to progress through.
Yes.
And you do that on an individual basis. And you can switch at any time that you want, provided you're not like in a dungeon or something. So if at one point I'm playing my Scholar, which is a healing class in the game, and I say, I'm kind of tired of healing for a while. I think I want to go do some tanking in the dungeon. If I've got a tank class that's up to a certain level, I just equip a new set of gear. You can save sets of gear to very, very quickly.
Very streamlined. You just once you save that particular gear set, you click a button and you transform right into that class, and you can just go at it.
And you can do whatever that class does that you want to do. So the fact that you only really need one character, right? You only need to make one character ever in this game, because that one character.
Yes. Unless I know endgame crafting, you get into specializations where you can only have 3 specializations. And so if you're really, really into crafting, then people will make alternate characters just to level alternate crafting classes.
But generally speaking.
But yes, 99% of the time there's no reason to make another character.
Which is really cool. It's really cool that you don't have to start from... Technically, you have to start from scratch when you change the class for the first time, but if you ever want to go back to that class, your character can just
the neat thing is you also get for your second class, maybe it's every class after your first class that you level, you get an experience bonus when you're leveling new classes. So it doesn't take, theoretically, it shouldn't take as long to level that second class as it does your first class. Although there's a trade-off, because you get quest experience when you're leveling that first class that you won't get the second time, but you get 50%, 100% experience bonus or something like that for leveling a second class or a third class or whatever. Um,
But
yeah.
basically, you're not married to the initial decision you make at the start of the game, which
No.
apparently is a big deal. Go ahead.
Oh, you're not even married to your appearance either. You're given a free potion that you can use, and you can also purchase potions for a small amount of real life money that will let you change your appearance and your race, and you can even change your name if you want to.
Wait, really? That's amazing.
Yes, for a lot of that you have to pay, a small. I think the name change is $1 per name change, and the appearance change is like $2. But I mean, if you're really that unhappy looking at your elf or whatever, you can change into the cat race if you want. So you can change. You're not going to change into the Lalafell race because nobody likes Lalafells. But yeah, I mean, if you can change gender, you can change anything you want. So you don't even have to keep the same. You can become a totally different character if you want.
So it's a very
and not
progressive.
have to sacrifice the time that it took you to level up that character. You just get to keep all that experience.
Right. Very progressive game. Transgender characters. You can switch easily.
I think you have to roleplay that. I don't think they actually have.
Oh. Well, still.
Have the actual option, but.
Well, my point of view, because we've talked about both of your histories with MMOs, and we haven't even mentioned the fact that this is my first MMO, barring a 5-day free trial of World of Warcraft that I did not like.
It was a brief tryst into World of Warcraft.
I played World of Warcraft for 30 days back during Burning Crusade, and I didn't like it either.
Yeah, but it isn't that strange that Final Fantasy XIV, because right, John has mentioned, yeah, some of the perks are the class change stuff, which I haven't really gotten to yet, and I didn't know about initially, and some of the flexibility and things like that, and I haven't even really gotten into the story yet. So it is interesting to me, why was I pulled into Final Fantasy XIV so quickly when I remember a couple days of WoW, I would even log on with Logan, our friend, or with John, and just kind of be like, I don't know, maybe it was overhyped at the time.
Is it perhaps, because this is sort of what drew me into Final Fantasy XIV, and this might be transitioning before we want to transition, but I don't care. What drew me in, as opposed to WoW, is that this is a Final Fantasy game, and I love Final Fantasy, and it feels like a Final Fantasy game. The atmosphere is very Final Fantasy-like. You have chocobos running around, you have Moogles, you have Final Fantasy stuff, whereas in WoW, it's WoW lore, and I don't really care about the lore of World of Warcraft. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I played a lot of Warcraft 2 with John growing up. We were always on the same team when we played multiplayer, and that always ended really well for John every time. Because I would never get to the very end of the game, invade his base, and then turn off the alliance. So that's
probably why you like Svado better, right?
You're an awful
You never would have
person.
done that to him.
Fado never would have done that, but I was familiar with it. I get what you're saying though, and I think it was funny because even like 10 minutes ago when John started talking about what is the hook, my mind jumps to Final Fantasy as a brand. I think is the hook that initially gets you, and I think that maybe some of that class stuff is what really draws you in further. It's more the bait than the hook, if you will, if I'm using my fisherman class skills correctly.
See, I think I was referring more to the idea that like a naive person to Final Fantasy in general would come into this and say like, what makes this game special compared to another MMO?
That was one of the chief marketing points for the re-release, that you can change classes on the fly. It might even be prominent on the box, and I'm gonna try and find that real quick.
But I agree. The Final Fantasy world is very Final Fantasy. It's got it's got a lot of sci-fi elements to it, like most Final Fantasies do now. And then it's also got your fantastical, regular fantasy stuff, high fantasy stuff. So it's got a lot of humor in there too. It's written very well. And that's the other thing that I really wanted to talk about was one of the other things I noticed, because really my only other true experience getting into an MMO was World of Warcraft. The story exists in World of Warcraft, but it's there to engage with if you want to as a player. You don't have to do it. So you can
Okay.
basically not read anything and just continue to progress through the game, and once you hit like the level threshold to move on to the next area, you don't even have to complete the story within the area that you're in. You can then just move on to the next area. So the story is there if you want to absorb it. If you don't, you can just play the game.
And you're
Final
directly involved in this story. You're the hero. And what I've heard about WoW is even if you do pay attention to the story, it seems like there's a lot of NPCs doing a lot of things, and you're sort of just in the periphery.
I mean, you're still a pretty big part in the WoW story, but again, like you can totally ignore it if you want. Whereas
Yeah.
in Final Fantasy XIV, you
Okay, I see
are
your point.
you are required. Like if you want to progress through the game and see all of the content that is there to see, you are required to play through the main story of the game, which I just finished actually, of the base game, not of the expansion.
You haven't
Yeah.
done the hours upon hours of questing to get into the expansion content.
Not yet. I've kind of just started that, but
Yeah.
I'm messing around with other classes right now. But
Right.
the fact that that story is required, the fact that there are dungeons in the game, and that's very standard for MMOs now to have instanced dungeons, which allow you to just go in with a party of people into a dungeon and go through the dungeon and kill stuff and bosses. Those are locked. Those are gated behind the story. You cannot unlock certain dungeons until you progress the main story, and the main story is really good. And
Yeah.
and I was just very impressed and surprised, like pleasantly surprised, that this MMO had such an interesting story, and it had one that it made me do, and that I wanted to do, that I wanted to continue. I mean, it wasn't without its issues, but like generally, it was a super pleasant surprise and differentiator between this game and World of Warcraft.
It is a Final Fantasy game. I mean, the Final Fantasy games are known for good stories, and actually earlier when Brad was talking about why they relaunched this game, part of the reason they put so much time and energy into relaunching it when they were deciding, from what I've read today basically, when they were deciding whether to relaunch it or what to do with it when they did it, is because that they thought the Final Fantasy brand itself had actually been damaged badly by this initial release because it was so widely panned. No Final Fantasy game has ever received as poorly as the original Final Fantasy XIV release. So when they went for it, they knew they had to do it right, and they put a lot of time and effort into it to make sure that it would relaunch because they needed to fix the brand. And they were actually almost as worried about brand damage as monetary damage because it's just, I mean, it's one of the greatest video game franchises there is, basically.
You can even tell as you're playing the game and as you're playing through the story how much care the developers took to really make the story and the experience something that's enjoyable and that you want to do. They put a lot of passion into a lot of the cutscenes and a lot of the characterization, and they borrowed a lot of things from other Final Fantasies, and then were able to incorporate it in various ways that makes a fan of Final Fantasy go, wow, look, there's Magitech armor. That's so cool. I remember that from Final Fantasy VI, but they do it in a way that doesn't make you go, oh, that's cool, but it's out of place. It seems completely organic as it pertains to like the world and the story. So, and like John was saying, I'm pretty sure John was the one that said this, that there's a lot of humor in the game, and there's a lot of things like it just the quest names where you read it. They love their puns. At
Oh,
least
it's
in
so
English
many.
version. like
So many.
there's one of my favorites is a quest called Ifrit Bleeds, We Can Kill It.
Oh my
if
god.
Ifrit bleeds, we can kill it, and then like there's just constant stuff like that. There's these open world like mini events called fates, and they all are named, and a lot of them are like my favorite one is probably one. It's the fate is literally called It's Not Lupus, and you fight a boss, a big crab boss that's named Cancer. So like, it's not lupus, but it's cancer, but it's like a house reference.
Wow, there's some good ones. I noticed
So-
the cutscene where they were flashing back to the big cataclysmic battle at the end of the original Final Fantasy XIV, and he loses communication over a headset with one of his teammates, and his name is Gray Snake, and he's like, Gray Snake, Gray Snake.
I actually, because I started a character on the server you play on last night, and I got to that scene, and I instantly thought like. They had to you have to notice that reference, like
a Metal Gear reference thrown into a massively multiplayer online.
There's even fates in one of the new zones for the expansion that makes reference to Metal Gear. What was the one with Raiden and then he destroys
Vengeance?
Yes. There's a series of fates that make reference to that and to the Metal Gear games as a whole, and it's things like that that really make the game that much more enjoyable. Where it's not just you can tell that they didn't just go, oh well, whatever, let's just slap this thing here on the map and just who cares? Like they'll do it or they won't. Who cares? They actually took time to make it funny or make it memorable.
Yeah,
and even those small mini open world events all have a story. They all have a paragraph or two of flavor text that you can read, and so they took the trouble to write all of that up too. And it.
So Cody, you said this is your first MMO. What has you hooked? Why did this one hook you?
So again, some of what we talked about with well, first of all, the fact that you're playing is cool, and the fact that Brad is playing is cool. So and the fact that it's a Final Fantasy game, I think that most Final Fantasy fans want to be able to say I've played every Final Fantasy game, and it's always felt like a big hole in my Final Fantasy repertoire for whatever reason that I've never played 11 or 14. So I guess that's part of it, but I keep hearing how good the story is, mostly from you, and I've read online that the story is amazing, and all these people are saying the story is so good. I'm 2 beats into the story. I'm basically, there's some vague threat somewhere. Go to these 2 cities and tell people maybe we should, I don't know, hang out. That's it. I'm just past level 20. The level cap is 60, but for those not as familiar with MMOs, the curve it steepens substantially. To get from level 1 to 2 takes about 3 enemies. To get from 2 to 3 takes a lot more than that. So by the time you're in the higher levels, it takes a really long time to get to another level, right? I think pretty much.
Generally.
So I just keep hearing about the story and how good it is, and the reason I keep playing it is because it's such a little crack pipe, that you're always getting these little rewards, and there's always victory music. My girlfriend has asked me 3 times, "Oh, did you beat the game?" Because because every time you level up or you complete a quest, there's this it's not just the feeling of, oh cool, I got 100 experience points for this, or oh cool, this guy just gave me a reward for this. It's that plus this amazing fanfare that blasts, and the entire experience just gives you this kind of immediate reward constantly, and there's just so much to do. I don't know. I mean, I just spent 250 hours 100%ing Metal Gear Solid 5, so I can be a little obsessive about getting all of stuff. And the fact that there is so much to collect and do in Final Fantasy XIV, I don't know. And I also don't feel tied down to the classes. I've never experienced an MMO where that would have been a problem, so I can't speak to the contrast, but I think it's nice. I like the idea. I've got 4 or 5 classes I'm running right now, so I'm just switching jobs randomly, attacking some guys, switching jobs again, attacking some guys, and I don't know. I'm really liking that, and the music is so good.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that kind of before we wrapped up. So what are you going to say about the music?
It's
Other than its
awesome. And Nobuo Uematsu, who composed most of the Final Fantasy series, did the original 100 or so tracks for Final Fantasy XIV. But then when they relaunched it, they actually hired a different composer.
Yes, he's amazing.
Yeah, Taka Michinoku. You may know him as a former WWF light heavyweight champion.
So
You
the
just
great thing
edit
about
that part
the
out,
great thing
right?
about the music is that it harkens back to most of it is homage to other themes that you have heard if you have played other Final Fantasy games, which is really nice.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of similarities, a lot of the same hooks in the music. There are like little things like I noticed this the other day because I got my you get a chocobo mount at one point in the game because of course you do, and it's got music when you mount the
Yes.
chocobo.
All
Like
the mounts have either
every mount has its own unique music, right?
not
Wow.
every mount. There's the chocobo mount music. There's a general non-chocobo like traveling music
And then I've
that
also got a
some of them
fat
use.
chocobo that has its own music.
Yes, and then there are specific amounts like that have music like you get eventually you get a Magitech armor mount, and that plays Terra's theme from like the open world theme from Final Fantasy VI, like a remix of it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and it's sweet. So the music is absolutely awesome.
And Brad, were you going to say something else? I kind of cut you off with the Taka Michinoku reference.
oh
Which,
yeah, you sure did. That was awful and horrible and should be shamed.
Mhm.
No, but there's a lot of the I suppose the new compositions that don't really have any kind of relation to old Final Fantasy songs are also really, really excellent. So much so that most of the time when I play, when I would play, previous MMOs or even games like I don't know, like Civ 5 or something like that. I turn off the game music. I don't need it. It's not really giving me anything that I haven't already heard. And but with this game, I find very much that I will turn up the music or I'll queue up for a specific fight just because the music is so awesome. And instead of just listening to it on YouTube, I might as well go fight the thing too. So
right.
and a lot of the music for the battles really heighten the excitement and the feelings that you're experiencing during the fight. Like there's the I guess the theme of A Realm Reborn. It's called Answers, and which is excellent, by the way. But the final boss of A Realm Reborn. It's not the A Realm Reborn story. It's the final raid boss of A Realm Reborn, and I'm not gonna to say what it is. But halfway through the fight, it's just this awesome theme. But then halfway through the fight, you start hearing this singing, and it harkens back to the opening cutscene of the entire game, and it hits you with this feeling that's just like wow, like I've never had a game really ever evoke these kinds of feelings in me just by just from a musical cue or something like that.
Yeah, it's one of the. I mean, I'm already listening to the soundtrack at work all the time on YouTube, and I just started playing it a couple weeks ago. Not even a week ago, is it? It's been very fresh. But yeah.
So one more thing before we finish up here, that I think it would be unfair to not say is that I do find a lot of there are systems upon systems upon systems in this game, many of which if up until this latest patch, many of which you weren't even aware that you could unlock. They just recently implemented a new quest marker in the game.
Yeah.
Originally, all of the quests were exclamation points, just the same exclamation point. They have since made quests with exclamation points with pluses on them and shaded blue, and those indicate quests that will unlock a new system or a new ability. and that has been very helpful to me as somebody who's playing the game for the first time and experiencing stuff for the first time. But there is missable stuff. It's not missable permanently, but there's a challenge log that you can unlock at level 15, and the challenge log is a weekly thing that lets you complete certain tasks per week for extra experience and money. I was level 45 before I read about it on the wiki and then went and unlocked it, because there was no indicator that this one random quest that looked the same as all other quests would unlock this thing. Now, like I said, since then they have changed that to make blue quests mean, hey, this is actually like for something permanent, so unlock this. And do this quest. So that was good, but that is something that, like I said, there is some stuff that is not explained to you. And also, like I said, there's many systems. It is a relatively complicated game. I am an original WoW player. To play your class well in this game, it is much more difficult.
Yes.
There are many more cooldowns that you have to be aware of when you're playing your class. There are many more abilities to use. There are cross-class abilities that allow you to use abilities from other classes depending on the class that you are, and those are generally necessary to play your class at the highest level. So it is a more complicated game to play than World of Warcraft is.
And yet, Square-Enix somehow developed an effective way to actually play this with a controller.
Yes, that's actually something I sort of wanted to talk about, because it's not just a PC game. You can play it on PlayStation 4 and on PlayStation 3, which is actually probably one of the reasons why it's been as successful as it has, because you don't have to have a good PC, and that was one of the downfalls of the original release, is even great PCs couldn't play it. But now you can play it on sort of you can play it on PS3. That's a different argument. But if you have a PlayStation, you can buy the game and you can play it, and it works perfectly well with a controller. It functions differently. I mean, I would probably never play an MMO, especially like John saying, an MMO with so many cooldowns and abilities and buttons. I can't live without my gaming MMO mouse. I just can't do it. But I could probably learn how to play on a controller, and there's never a time where I'm doing a dungeon with somebody or doing a battle with somebody where I've thought, I bet they use a controller. It's completely it's same level of performance as you would on a keyboard or mouse, and you can fully customizable. I'm pretty sure you can customize any of the keybinds. You can do whatever you want. You can set up things how you see fit.
Yeah, I'm happy with it. I sit on my couch and play it. I have not used a keyboard once, except to whisper sweet nothings to both of your characters and type you in the friends list search.
That's the only downfall of the controller, because there is a on-screen software keyboard, I believe, at least for PlayStation. I don't know about PC because I've never used the controller, but the typing that's really the only time you can tell if somebody's using a controller, is when they're having problems typing, or they say can't type really well or something like that, because it's like using one of the old style cell phone, where it's not a smartphone. You have to press things a million times and scroll around for it, and
didn't Sony or Microsoft introduce a literal keyboard controller where there was a little keyboard kind of in the middle of the two handles a few years ago? I thought that was a thing briefly.
I think Microsoft has one of those.
Yeah, I think Xbox might have. And Microsoft, Square Enix recently announced that Final Fantasy XIV and Realm Reborn will be coming to Xbox One.
They actually announced that for sure?
Yeah, I believe they did. Coming in October when they announced the 4.0, I guess.
Okay.
They're going to announce it at a fan convention later this year, I believe in October. Yeah, October, because it's coming.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, after Final Fantasy XV is released in September. I remember that specifically. So Final Fantasy XIV, they're going to announce at this fan convention, and I'm pretty sure Microsoft, because Microsoft's new thing in E3 was no player left behind or whatever it was, because and they want more cross-platform compatibility. The reason they didn't originally develop it for Xbox was because they had issues with Xbox Live, which is Microsoft's online service, allowing them cross-platform play. I mean, the idea with MMO is you log in on any device and you're playing with each other, and Xbox wasn't really having that, but now they're going to open up and let them do that.
Wasn't the deal something that they wanted, Xbox wanted to charge extra or something? They wanted to make you buy Xbox Live to play Final Fantasy XIV or something like that. Like they wanted you to pay them more than you would just buying it and playing on PC or something like that.
Yeah, maybe they wanted you to have gold, like Xbox Live Gold to play.
It used to be to have any online service, you had to have Xbox Live Gold, because I used to watch Netflix on my Xbox. My Xbox Live subscription expired, and I actually couldn't even watch Netflix
or
with
the
my
WWE Network.
Or the WWE Network.
And
now they have since fixed the Netflix deal, so you can watch it on your Xbox now without a gold account. But I'm not sure about other apps, especially the WWE Network, which is only $9.99.
Oh, okay. Well, this is where both me and John leave. No, but because I know what the deal with PlayStation is, because you have to have the PlayStation Network, but you don't have to have the, whatever the subscription, whatever they call it, PlayStation
Plus,
Gold or
PlayStation Plus.
Plus minus, yeah. So, yeah.
Yep. Look at us.
I got nothing else. The game's really good.
Yeah, it is.
And if people want to play with us, we are on the Cactar server. You just created a character on the Cactar server, which is awesome, and I'm looking forward to play. Does John know your character's name yet, or is that going to be a pleasant surprise?
I mean, you can surprise him with it now if you want. I mean, you can spoil the.
Well, yeah, because I need to friend you now.
The reveal. I mean, I'm not sure I'm comfortable giving away my character details like that. It's a private thing, but you might be able to find me as the character named Doctor of Thugonomics.
It's a good name.
Yeah, well, that's what Cody thought.
That is what I thought. That is exactly what I thought. I thought to myself, what a good name. It was so much...
the one I wanted was taken, unfortunately, so... You see a character running around Cactuar that's named John Cena, it's not me.
Oh, God. Really?
Of course that was going to be taken.
Oh, God, why is that taken?
I actually used to, back in 2.1, I used to raid, one of our tanks I used to raid with a character named Arnold Schwarzenegger. And it was the best name ever, and he had this emote where he would lick everyone that was near him. So you'd be standing around like in town or whatever, and he'd hit the emote, and he would just go down, and it would be like Arnold Schwarzenegger licks you. Arnold Schwarzenegger licks this person and this person and this person, and he was notorious on the server, and for some reason people hated that emote. I can't imagine why. So he was blacklisted by a good 50 to 60% of the server just because of that emote. And so there'd be things where like we'd get together and we wouldn't have a full party, so we'd be like, all right, well, let's find some other people to do some stuff. And we'd find some people, and we'd get into the raid or whatever, and we'd go over strategy, and like the black mage wouldn't be answering. He wouldn't be, responding with affirmative or even no, that's a bad idea. Just wouldn't be responding with anything. And then we were on, some of us were on voice chat, so Arnold would say something along the lines of, I'm pretty sure this person has me blacklisted, and that's why they can't see what I'm saying. And then we'd ask him, hey, do you have our tank blacklisted? Oh, yeah, I totally do. Didn't even realize it was the same guy. Here, let me take him off blacklist so I can see strategy in chat. And, yep, it's just the way it works. So those are
That's amazing.
interactions that you could get in this game. So
that's really great. John, have you been doing a lot of group stuff? Have you met people?
I've been basically doing only group stuff, but the way instances work are they're cross realm, so you get matched with people that aren't necessarily on your server.
Okay.
And so they're not exactly in my in my experience or opinion, a way to kind of meet people. I am part of a free company, which is the version of Guild in this game for those that have played World of Warcraft. It's basically a group of player characters that all they are in one large group together, and that affords you some benefits as a player. So I don't know. I basically don't participate in that at all, though. I generally haven't really participated in any of the social aspects of this particular game yet. I've been running kind of dungeon after dungeon, though. I'm finding them really fun in this game. Another thing this game does that we didn't talk about that was introduced, I think, first in Guild Wars, is that it syncs your level depending on what you're doing. And so there's no content that you ever level out of, because if you ever get up too high of a level for content, you can do what's called level syncing, and it basically syncs your level and all of your gear and all of your stats down to an appropriate level for the content you're doing. And so it will still always be somewhat of a challenge to do.
And it gets a little bit wonky when you hit the level 50 mark, because there's a lot of content that's sort of not vertical but horizontal, but slightly. So because once you hit level 50, they introduce the concept of item levels, not just character levels. So eventually you're going to hit a cap. You can't get to level 61, right? But you're of course going to want to get more powerful. You're going to get better gear. So they introduced this concept called item level. So each piece of gear has its own, quote, level associated with it. So once you hit level 50, which was the previous level cap, the gear starts going up in item level. So you can have like item level 125 or something like that gear, and it'll only sync it down to 120 instead of 50 or something like that. So there is some measure of, you can still outgear some of the content when you sync down, but not so much that it's
trivial.
There's some fights that it's trivial, but that's just more how the fight is designed, because the fights are never designed with the idea that you're going to be syncing, like that you're going to be overgearing them, I guess, is what my point is. Like, some of the fights mechanics, like there's certain fights that have just one-shot mechanics, and it doesn't matter what your gear is, you're just going to die if you screw up the mechanic. But then there's other mechanics where it does damage, and if you have good enough gear, even though you might be synced down, why would I avoid it when it's going to make it harder?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
But for the most part, the content is, you'll never really out-level the content. You'll still have to... because I guess what I was talking about is you can, once you get past level 50, you can do what's called oh god, I can't remember the term.
Not a level sync?
Yeah, basically, you can go in with less than the required number of players, because usually you have to, if you queue up for something, you have to go in either as, if it's a 4-man, you have to go in with 4 people. If it's 8, you have to go in with 8. But once you get past a certain point, they let you go in with 4, but it doesn't sync you. So you can be unsynced, and you can, challenge it without the required number of players or the required meta for what classes you have to bring and stuff like that. So in that sense, you can just totally make the fight trivial if you're a high enough level. But usually people just do that because there's an item that drops at the end, and they get a couple people together, and they're just like, let's just run this over and over and over again until we get the thing. And
that makes sense. Yeah, John also mentioned, or maybe you mentioned, that the raids. I mean, I remember in college and hearing from John, World of Warcraft, you'd schedule a raid, and hey, you want to go out for Saturday night? Oh no, we're doing an 8
hours. 3 hours.
What's 3 hours?
Our raid times were 3 hours long.
In World of Warcraft?
Yes.
In World of
And
Warcraft, there were 8-hour raids though.
Well, I mean, over the course of a week, you spend a couple of nights doing a couple hours at a time.
yes, so your question is about like, is it the same as WoW, like raid
Oh no,
wise?
I've heard that the raids in Final Fantasy XIV don't get that intense, and they're
Well,
usually like closer to an hour.
so there's different levels of content, and it's not really made explicit to you so
No, that
much.
is not clear at all.
But and it gets really confusing once you get to level 50, and they use a naming scheme for one thing because they weren't considering that they were going to increase they knew they were going to increase the level cap, but they named stuff as if they weren't, and it gets weird. But basically, there's a couple of different kinds of content in this game. There's 4-man content, which is your basic like dungeons that you'll do, like story dungeons as you're leveling, that are relatively simple, and everybody has to do them, and everybody does do them for the most part. So that's just the I guess the baseline content is the 4-man stuff, and then there are slightly more difficult challenges which increase the number of players to 8 men, and those are generally instead of going through a dungeon and fighting a couple of bosses intermixed with packs of trash enemies that you just kill. It's usually just a one-off fight against, like, I don't know, Ramu or something like that. And those are the 8-man things. But those take 5-10 minutes. It's not that big of a deal. But there are harder versions of the 8-man fights, which are sort of like the mid-core content. Like they're called extreme fights, and that might make it seem like they're super hard, but that's actually the mid-core content. And then what they call, they don't call those raids at all. They either call them dungeons or they call them primal battles. But the raids that they have are 8-men content, and they separate them into 2 categories: normal story mode, which, quote, everyone's supposed to be able to do, which is not true, but because people are bad at the game. But then they have the highest tier of content that you can do is called Savage, and that is probably analogous to the WoW, whatever, mythic, heroic, whatever the top tier of WoW is, in the sense that you schedule raid times, 3, 4, 5 hours a day, multiple times a week, if you are serious about clearing it in a quick manner. Like when these fights first come out, you'll have the top raid groups in the world take off 1 to 2 to 3 weeks of work right in a row, and they save all their vacation, or they're in a situation where they can afford to take 3, they're not working or they're at school, or they save up all their vacation to take off a couple of weeks right when these fights come out so that they can raid 20 hours a day 7 days a week or something crazy like that. And the fights are hard enough so it takes them 2 weeks to clear whatever tier it is, the couple of fights that are released.
Wow.
So it can get pretty crazy, but for the most part, it's pretty casual to mid-core difficulty. And anything that's casual or mid-core, you can just jump on in for the most part. You don't have to have a specific time or do anything like that. You can just find a group and go for it for however long you want.
Yeah, I'll let you know when I get to that level, and then I will just do those hardcore raids with you guys. It'll be great. And I'll play Taka Michinoku's entrance music in the background.
Wow. That's something that happened.
Yep, it sure is. Well, that's cool. All right, well, anyway, we should probably wrap up because I gotta eat dinner. But this was super fun, and Brad, thanks for joining us. This is like I wanted to get the different experience levels. John's like the MMO. I've done all the look. I've played every MMO that's ever been made. I was EverQuest before you guys knew what WoW was, and I'm like, I don't even know what an MMO is. And you've played Final Fantasy XI and 14, which I think is actually cool. So here we are. And I think we all recommend the game, and I will be playing much more of it. And if people want to play with us, they can join the Cactar server. If they want to learn more about us, then they can do the stuff that John's going to say in the closing statement.
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you for listening to the Game Life Balance US podcast, the American edition of the Game Life Balance podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this episode, and leave us a review if you really want to make our day. You can find us at the Gonna Geek Network at gonnageek.com or on the official podcast network of Chicago's WGN Radio at WGNplus.com. Learn more about Game Life Balance, including contact information and links to our sister show in Australia at gamelifebalance.us.
And our friend Will used to call chocobos chobacos.
He did call them.
That's actually the title of my movie that I forgot to plug.
Oh, right, you didn't get to plug your movie.
Brad, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.